Bang, bang, bang. Someone was pounding on my door at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday. Groggy and half awake, I stumbled out of bed in nothing but my boxers, swung the door open, and found the ultimate Karen standing there. She had a fake blonde bob, a cheap knockoff blazer, and a face twisted in fury that could make milk sour. "You need to move that boat now," she screeched, not even giving me a chance to say good morning. Behind her was a clipboard as thick as a customs form and a roll of bright orange violation stickers that could ruin anyone's weekend. Little did I know, this was just the first salvo in a war that would end with her packing up her life into a U-Haul while the neighborhood cheered her exit. Drop a comment with what state you're watching from. Apparently, Karen drama is a language everyone speaks. Let's back up a bit. My name is Nathan Cole. I'm 39. A graphic designer working from home. About 18 months ago, after my divorce, I moved to Sunset Harbor, Florida, hoping to find some peace and quiet by the water. The place came with a little dock where I kept my fishing boat, nothing fancy, just a 14-footer I'd named Lazy Sunday. Most mornings, I'd sit out there with my coffee and watch the sunrise over the lake. It was bleak until Hurricane Karen knocked on my door. "Ma'am, I think there's been some kind of mix-up," I said, trying to be polite even though I was mostly naked and half asleep. "That's my boat on my dock. It's been there since I moved in." She stared at me like I just claimed the moon was made of cheese. "Your dock? Your dock?" she repeated, starting to laugh, though it was the kind of laugh that makes you want to slowly back away. "This is community water," she spat, "and that boat is in violation of Section 12.3b of the Homeowners Association regulations." Then she slapped a bright orange sticker on my poor little boat like she was serving a search warrant. I looked at this woman who I'd soon learn was named Dana Lissa, trying to process what was happening. She was taking photos from every angle like it was some kind of crime scene, using a clipboard that looked official but suspiciously homemade. "I'm sorry, boot to broken bar. Who are you?" I asked. "I'm Dana Ellison," she announced grandly, "president of the Sunset Harbor Homeowners Association." "And you're in serious violation of community standards." It felt surreal. There I was in my underwear at dawn, being lectured by someone who clearly thrived on bossing others around. Dana wasn't done. She pulled out what looked like an official violation notice printed on regular computer paper but with enough fonts and borders to make it seem legit. "You have 24 hours to remove this unauthorized watercraft," she declared in a voice like she was reading a court verdict, "or you'll be fined $500 per day." $500 a day? I repeated, still trying to convince myself I wasn't dreaming. "The rules are very clear," she snapped, adjusting her obviously fake jewelry. "No personal watercraft in community areas without proper authorization. Your dock may be attached to your property, but the water is shared." She said it all with the confidence of someone who'd never been wrong in her life. I couldn't help but notice her beat-up BMW parked in my driveway. "Look," I said, trying to keep the peace, "I think there's a misunderstanding. When I bought this place, the dock was included in the deed. I have all the paperwork." Dana just waved her hand dismissively. "Paperwork can be wrong," she said. "I've lived here for 3 years. I know the rules better than anyone. That boat needs to go, period." She took one last photo for good measure, then spun on her heel and marched back to her car. 24 hours, she called over her shoulder. "And don't even think about ignoring these. I'll be watching." As I watched her drive off, I noticed she was heading for the smallest house in the neighborhood. Something about this whole exchange didn't sit right with the way she kept hammering on being HOA president, the desperate need to feel in charge. I dealt with plenty of tough clients in my design work, but this was different. I went back inside and made myself some coffee, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. Part of me wanted to just move the boat to avoid trouble. Life's too short to argue with a crazy neighbor, right? But Dana's attitude rubbed me the wrong way. Her smug certainty, her immediate hostility, the way she treated me like a criminal for having a boat at my own dock, and that fine of $500 a day, that sounded extreme, even for the strictest hoe. So, I called my ex-wife, Rachel. Yeah, it might seem weird, but we'd stayed friends after the divorce, and she's a property lawyer. If anyone could clear this up, it'd be her. "Hey, Rachel," I said when she picked up. I need some advice on property law. Can you explain HOA rules to me? She paused. Nathan, what's going on? I told her about Dana's 6:30 a.m. visit, the violation notice, and the insane fine. Bring me your property deed and any HOA documents you got when you bought the place, Rachel said once I'd finished. I'll take a look this afternoon. But Nathan, something about this doesn't sound right. Most HOAs can't just slap on $500 a day finesse, especially not for a boat at a private dock. I hung up feeling like this was only the beginning. The way Dana had acted, it didn't feel like this was really about boat rules. It felt personally, like she had some kind of vendetta against me from the moment she laid eyes on my little slice of paradise. The setup felt loaded with jealousy and resentment. I figured Rachel would just clarify some dry property law stuff, but I had no idea she was about to drop a bombshell that would change everything. She arrived that afternoon, lawyer face on, that expression she gets when she's ready to dismantle someone's argument. She spread out my property documents on the kitchen table and spent 10 minutes scanning through every page. Finally, she looked up. Nathan, she said, your dock is 100% legal. You own the waterfront. She pointed to the survey. See this line? Your property extends all the way to the water's edge. That dock's been there since the house was built. So Dana was full of it? I asked, though deep down I already knew. Completely wrong, Rachel confirmed. And get these, I don't see any official record of her being elected HOA president. From what I can tell, she just a broken bar appointed herself. Things were getting interesting. Rachel gathered up the papers and gave me a serious look. Nathan, I think you're dealing with someone on a power trip. Be careful. The next morning, I was on the dock with my coffee when an older woman approached, her warm smile already a relief. You must be Nathan, she said. I'm Evelyn Brooks. I live in the blue house down the street. I wanted to apologize for yesterday morning. I invited her to sit down. Curious. Apologize for what? Evelyn settled into the chair next to me with a sigh. For Dana Ellison. She's been making life miserable for this neighborhood for months. She told me stories that made my blood boil. Dana calling in code enforcement on kids for chalk drawings, trying to ban normal backyard activities. Dana's obsessed with control, Evelyn said. Since her divorce, she's been taking out her anger on anyone who seems happy. You probably became a target because you seem so broken. Bar content. And that drives her nuts. That evening, I found a notice taped to my door. Emergency home meeting tonight, 7 p.m., Community Center. Urgent violations to discuss. I could practically feel Dana's glee radiating off the paper. Well, if she wanted a meeting, I'd be there armed with facts. I gathered my documents and headed over. The scene looked like a sitcom. Dana had set up a projector for what looked like a PowerPoint show and was standing at the front of the room, gavel in hand, like she was running some corporate board meeting. She was wearing a new outfit, and about 15 residents had shown up, most of them looking puzzled about why they were even there. Dana banged her gavel and started her show. We're here to address serious violations of community standards, she said in her most dramatic voice. As your HOA president, it's my duty to protect property values and ensure everyone plays by the rules. I noticed a few people exchanging skeptical looks. Clearly, I wasn't the only one doubting her authority. She even had a slide with a photo of my boat, complete with a red circle and an X mark. When she finished, I stood up. I'd like to respond to these accusations, I said calmly. I walked to the front and spread out my property deed so everyone could see. This is my property survey, I explained. As you can see, my property line goes right to the water's edge. That dock is on my land and nowhere near community property. I watched Dana's face go from red to white as neighbors leaned in to look at the papers. And, I continued, I have all the permits for the dock. Everything is by the book. Dana was staring at the documents, her face turning an alarming shade of red. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she realized her little power play was crumbling. But instead of backing down, she tried to dig in. Well, she said, her voice suddenly higher, even if the dock is technically on your property, all boats in the community must have proper authorization. The room was getting restless. People were tired of Dana's nonsense. Emergency rule change, Dana announced suddenly. All boats in Sunset Harbor must pay a monthly dock maintenance fee of $2,000. A heavy silence fell over the room. $2,000? Several people said at once, "And where exactly does it say you can charge that?" I asked, my voice calm. "I have full authority as HOA president," Dana shot back, but her voice was cracking. That's when Evelyn spoke up. "Since when? I don't remember voting for you." Other residents started murmuring in agreement. "What board?" asked Mr. Patterson from down the street. Dana's carefully constructed facade was collapsing right there in front of us. "I was elected by the board," she insisted, but it was clear she was making it up. The meeting descended into chaos. Neighbors were pulling out their phones to record the scene as Dana realized she'd pushed it too far. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, snatching up her materials and bolting for the exit. As people filed out, a few neighbors stopped to thank me for standing up to her. "Someone had to call her out," said Mrs. Chen, giving me a nod of approval. Lynn patted my shoulder. "You've got guts, Nathan." Dana doesn't know how to handle someone who stands up to her. As I walked home, I felt satisfied but also wary. Dana had been publicly humiliated tonight, and I had a feeling she wouldn't let that go easily. That night, I decided to dig deeper into the community records. What I uncovered sent a chill down my spine. The next morning, I did what any sane person would do after being harassed by a self-appointed HOA president. I researched everything I could about Sunset Harbor's actual governance. What I discovered was equal parts fascinating and infuriating. According to the county, there was no official HOA for Sunset Harbor at all. Dana Ellison had literally made herself president of an organization that didn't exist. But that wasn't even the most shocking part. As I kept digging through property records, I discovered that Dana didn't even own her home. She was renting the smallest unit in the neighborhood. Suddenly, her obsession with controlling everything made sense. She was the least invested resident, desperate to create some kind of power for herself. Armed with this information, I decided to do some field research. Over the next few days, I documented Dana's own violations of the so-called community standards she loved to preach about. She parked in the fire lane, had loud arguments on her phone in the early mornings, and installed concrete garden borders without a single permit. On Thursday, Evelyn stopped by with the latest neighborhood gossip. "You should know that Dana's been calling everyone, trying to drum up support for her crusade against you," she said. "But it's not going well. People are getting tired of her nonsense." Evelyn leaned in conspiratorially. "I may have also mentioned to a few neighbors that you've got actual legal documents, while she's just making things up." That afternoon, Dana showed me just how far she was willing to go. She called the county code enforcement office and filed a complaint about my dock. The inspector called me directly to schedule an appointment. "I'll be out tomorrow morning around 10, he said. "Probably just a routine check, but I have to follow up on every complaint." I thanked him and immediately called Rachel to let her know. Friday morning dawned bright and sunny, classic Florida weather. I was sipping coffee on the dock when the code enforcement truck pulled up. The inspector, a friendly guy named Mike Rodriguez, walked over with his clipboard and measuring tape. "You must be Nathan," he said. "I'm here about a complaint regarding your dock." I handed over my permits and documentation, which he examined thoroughly. "Everything looks good here," Mike said after about 15 minutes. "The dock is built to code and fully permitted. No violations." I noticed Dana lurking by her house, clearly hoping for some dramatic showdown. "Actually," Mike continued, "I spotted some unpermitted concrete work in the garden over there." "Is that on your property?" I followed his gaze to Dana's yard borders. "Nope, that's my neighbor's place," I said. What happened next was like something out of a sitcom. Mike walked over to inspect Dana's concrete work while she hurried out of her house, flustered and red-faced. "Ma'am, I need to ask you about these concrete borders," Mike said politely. "Do you have permits for this hardscaping?" Dana's expression shifted from confident to confused to downright panicked. "Permits? But yeah, ma'am," Mike said, still calm. "This is your rental property, and county codes require permits for permanent concrete installations." He started writing on his clipboard while Dana's voice climbed higher and higher. "But I'm the one who called you. You're supposed to be citing him," she shrieked, jabbing a finger in my direction like I was some kind of criminal mastermind. I took a long sip of my coffee, doing my best not to grin. Mike finished writing and handed Dana the citation. "Ma'am, I'm issuing a violation notice for unpermitted hardscaping. You have 30 days to either get the proper permits or remove the work. The fine is $850. Dana's face turned from red to purple as she spluttered. This is ridiculous. I am the HOA president. Ma'am, that doesn't override county building codes, Mike replied with professional calm. He turned back to me and shook my hand. Your dock is completely legal, Mr. Cole. Have a good day. As he drove away, I saw neighbors peeking out of their windows, as some even recording Dana's meltdown. Dana stormed over to my dock, absolutely seething. This is all your fault, she yelled. You turned everyone against me. I stood up slowly, keeping my tone calm and steady. Dana, I didn't turn anyone against you. The inspector asked for documents, and I gave them to him. If your concrete work doesn't have permits, that's between you and the county. You think you're so clever, she hissed. But I know people. I have connections. This isn't over. She stormed back to her house and slammed the door so hard I half expected the frame to shatter. Within the hour, my phone lit up with texts from neighbors who'd seen the whole show. Evelyn sent me a particularly amusing message. Just watched the best reality TV show ever. No subscription needed. That evening, I decided I needed to get a clearer picture of what I was dealing with. I called Rachel and asked if she'd meet me for dinner. I think it's time I understood exactly what I inherited when I bought this place. I told her, there's something about this whole situation that doesn't sit right. Dana's acting like she's got something to lose, but she's just a renter. What am I missing here? Rachel was silent for a long moment as I recounted everything that had happened that week. Nathan, she said slowly, I think it's time we had a serious talk about your grandfather's estate. When I handled the inheritance paperwork, there were a few details I didn't think were important to bring up at the time. I could hear the sound of papers rustling in the background. Can you come to my office tomorrow? There are some documents you need to see. Then she went quiet again before speaking 5 words that changed everything. Nathan, we need to talk. Saturday morning found me sitting in Rachel's office, surrounded by stacks of manila folders and legal documents that apparently contained secrets about my own life. Nathan, Rachel began as she laid out papers on the conference table. When your grandfather passed away and left you the house, you asked me to handle the basics, transfer the deed, pay the taxes, make sure everything was legal. I nodded, remembering how overwhelmed I'd felt at the time grieving, going through a divorce, and just trying to hold my life together. Well, the house itself was straightforward, Rachel continued. But your grandfather's estate? That was a whole different story. She pulled out an old survey map that looked like something from a different era. Your grandfather bought this entire area when it was still farmland, back in the 80s, she said. I stared at the map, trying to comprehend what she was showing me. What do you mean, an entire area? I asked, even though I could already see the answer on the map in front of me. Rachel pointed to various sections of the survey. I mean the entire lake, Nathan, and the land underneath most of these houses. I blinked, stunned. That can't be, I said, though the evidence was right there in black and white. Rachel pulled out another document, a deed that looked as intimidating as it did official. You own Sunset Harbor Lake, she said, her voice gentle but firm. The entire thing. 180 acres of water, plus the land under 18 of the 23 houses in the development. Her words hit me like a freight train. I owned the lake where Dana had been threatening to ban me. But I would have known that, right? I asked, feeling foolish even as I said it. Rachel gave a small, understanding laugh. Nathan, you told me you didn't want to deal with anything complicated back then. You were grieving, going through your divorce, and just wanted the house transferred. I handled the corporate side of things separately. She showed me how my grandfather had quietly bought up the land, developed it over time, selling homes while holding on to ownership of the lake and the underlying lots. Most of the residents were actually paying annual fees for lake access and utilities. They don't own their lots outright, Rachel explained. They have long-term leases with your family's companies. As this information sank in, I started seeing Dana's behavior through an entirely new lens. So when she said the lake was community property, a broken bar, I began. She was dead wrong, Rachel finished. The lake is private property, your property. She has no say in it whatsoever. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the documents that had just turned my world upside down. "So I'm not just some guy with a fishing boat," I said slowly, a smile forming despite the shock. "I'm the guy who actually owns the body of water she's trying to ban me from." The irony of it all was almost too perfect. Dana had spent weeks trying to create an illusion of authority over community property, when the real authority belonged to the quiet guy in flip-flops she'd been trying to bully. "Does this mean I can actually ban her from the lake?" I asked. "Technically, yes," Rachel said with a small smile, "but I'd recommend handling it more diplomatically than that." As I drove home from Rachel's office, my head was spinning. All those mornings I'd sat on my dock sipping coffee, watching the sun rise. I'd been enjoying my own private lake. And every time Dana had threatened to fine me for using community water, she'd actually been threatening the lake's owner. But my newfound peace was short-lived. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw a small crowd gathered around the community center. Dana's voice was unmistakably loud and agitated, echoing across the water. I walked over to see what was happening and found her in the middle of what looked like an impromptu rally. "We need to take decisive action," she was saying to the crowd of residents. "Nathan Cole has shown complete disrespect for our community standards, and we can't let that stand." I watched from the edge of the gathering as Dana worked herself into a frenzy. "He thinks he can just ignore our rules because he's got some lawyer friend," she continued, her voice rising. "Well, I have news for him. This is our community, and we decide who belongs here." Some of the residents looked uneasy at her words, but a few were nodding along. It was clear that Dana had been spending the past few days rallying her supporters. I had no idea what the real story was. I motioned for an immediate vote, and Dana didn't hesitate to call for it. "All in favor of permanently banning Nathan Cole from community lake access, say aye," she announced. To my surprise, 3 people actually said aye. But I noticed they were all residents who didn't even live near the lake, or people who had no clue what was truly going on. "All opposed?" Dana asked quickly, trying to rush it through before anyone could raise real objections. Evelyn's voice cut through the tense silence. "This is ridiculous. You can't just ban someone because you don't like them." "The motion passes," Dana declared triumphantly, her smile smug and self-satisfied. "Nathan Cole is hereby banned from all community amenities, effective immediately. If he violates this ban, he will be subject to trespassing charges." She was practically glowing with victory, completely oblivious to the fact that she had just banned the actual property owner from his own lake. As the crowd began to disperse, Evelyn came over to me. "I'm sorry about that circus," she said quietly. Dana only invited her supporters, and she rushed the vote before anyone could even say anything. "It's not legitimate, and everyone knows it." I thanked her for standing up, but honestly, I wasn't even angry. If anything, I was fascinated by how far Dana was willing to take her delusion of authority. That night, I sat on my dock with the property documents Rachel had given me, looking out over my lake under the starlight. For the first time, I truly understood what people meant when they talked about generational wealth. My grandfather hadn't just left me a house, he'd left me a legacy. Dana Ellison had no idea what she was really dealing with. As I held the deed to the lake, I realized Dana had no clue she'd just tried to ban the owner of the very property she was standing on. The next morning, I called Rachel to update her on Dana's latest stunt. "She banned you from the lake," Rachel said, her voice incredulous, and I could hear her trying not to laugh. "Nathan, she just banned the legal owner of the lake from his own property. Do you realize how completely absurd that is?" "I'm starting to get the picture," I said, half smiling. "What's our next move?" "We're going to let her keep digging her own hole," Rachel replied. "Then, when the time is right, we'll show everyone exactly who owns what around here." Dana wasted no time enforcing her new ban. By Monday morning, she had put up laminated signs around the lake that read, "Public community water, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted." They were obviously homemade, but she'd mounted them on metal stakes like they were official notices. She'd even hired Tyler Patterson, a 19-year-old kid from down the street, as her lake security guard for $25 an hour. Tuesday morning brought the most surreal encounter yet. I was sitting on my dock enjoying my coffee when Tyler paddled over in a kayak, looking incredibly uncomfortable. Sir," he called out hesitantly, "Mrs. Ellison says you're not allowed to be here." I could see Dana standing on the shore, phone in hand, filming the whole thing. "Hey Tyler," I said calmly, "what's going on?" He shifted uncomfortably in the kayak. "She hired me as security. She says you're banned from the water, and I have to ask you to leave." What happened next was downright surreal. As I started packing up my fishing gear, Dana began live streaming the encounter. "This is what happens when people think they're above the community," she said, her voice full of righteous indignation. "Watch as we restore order to Sunset Harbor." She was practically buzzing with excitement, completely oblivious to the fact that she was filming herself harassing the lake's legal owner. "Of course," I said to Tyler with a calm smile, "just following community rules." I started loading my boat as Dana continued to narrate the scene from shore. "Make sure you get him leaving," she called out to Tyler. Tyler paddled along next to me, his voice low. "Sorry, man," he whispered. "She's paying me, and I need the gas money." But this is really weird. The whole neighborhood had turned out to watch Dana's performance. Some people were recording, others just watching in stunned silence as I loaded my boat onto its trailer. Dana, meanwhile, delivered what she clearly thought was a triumphant speech. "Let this be a lesson to everyone," she declared dramatically. "No one is above our community standards. This is what real leadership looks like." Over the next few days, Dana took her security measures to even more ridiculous levels. She put a folding chair by the lake for round-the-clock surveillance and created fake violation tickets, using carbon paper. She even started charging residents guest fees whenever their family wanted to visit the lake. The final straw came Friday evening, when Tyler knocked on my door looking troubled. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, "I wanted to give you a heads up," Tyler said quietly. "Mrs. Ellison is planning something big this weekend. She keeps talking about making an example out of you, and I don't think it's going to be good." Saturday morning dawned with perfect weather, and I decided to take my boat out on the lake one last time before revealing the truth about my ownership. As I loaded my fishing gear, I spotted Dana on the shore, setting up what looked like a makeshift command center. She had Tyler and 2 other teenagers with her, all wearing matching t-shirts that said Lake Patrol. I launched my boat and glided out to my favorite fishing spot. The water was like glass, peaceful and calm until, within minutes, Dana's security team was paddling toward me in their kayaks. Dana coordinated from shore with a cheap walkie-talkie system, her voice echoing across the lake. "Sir, you need to leave the water immediately," Tyler called out when they reached me. "You're in violation of community regulations. Mrs. Ellison says she'll call the police if you don't comply." I looked at the 3 teenagers, all of them looking extremely uncomfortable. "Just doing your jobs, right?" I said. They nodded gratefully. As I drove home later with my boat in tow, I noticed neighbors gathered in small groups, clearly talking about what they just witnessed. Several people waved sympathetically, and Evelyn gave me a thumbs up from her garden. Dana had overplayed her hand so thoroughly that even her few supporters were starting to question her methods. That evening, I texted Rachel. "Tomorrow," I said, "it's time." Her reply came instantly. "I'll bring the popcorn. This is going to be good." Dana had just publicly humiliated the owner of everything she thought she controlled. She had no idea what was coming. Sunday evening arrived with a dramatic sunset that seemed tailor-made for what was about to happen. Dana had called another emergency community meeting to finalize my ban and establish her new security protocols. I arrived at the community center with Rachel, both of us carrying folders full of documents that would change everything. The room was packed. A word had spread about Dana's increasingly bizarre power grabs, and people were curious to see what would unfold next. Dana had gone all out, setting up her presentation like a corporate board meeting. She stood at the front of the room, wearing what was clearly her best outfit, complete with fake jewelry that caught the light every time she moved. Her confidence was absolute, as she genuinely believed she was about to solidify her authority once and for all. "We're here tonight to address a serious threat to our community," Dana began, clicking to her first slide, which showed a photo of me fishing, crossed out in red. "Nathan Cole has shown complete disregard for our rules and democratic decisions. Tonight, We make his ban permanent and establish clear consequences for anyone who thinks they're above community standards. She clicked through slide after slide detailing her security improvements and enforcement protocols, each one more absurd than the last. She'd even created an organizational chart that showed herself as the community standards director, with various residents assigned roles in her fantasy security force. The whole thing was so unhinged that people in the audience were exchanging nervous glances. "Before we vote," Dana announced dramatically, "I want everyone to understand the stakes. If we let people like Nathan ignore our rules, property values will plummet. Our community will become lawless. We must take a stand." She was working herself up to what she clearly thought would be a triumphant finale when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said calmly, "but before we vote on anything, there's something I should probably mention." Dana's face flushed bright red. "You're banned from speaking here." She snapped. "Security, escort this trespasser out." She looked around, but her security team of teenagers suddenly found their phones very interesting. I walked to the front of the room and placed a large document on the table. "This," I said simply, "is my property deed." The room fell silent. People leaned forward, eyes widening as they read the words. "According to this legal document," I continued, "I own Sunset Harbor Lake, the entire thing, 180 acres of water." There was a long, stunned pause before Dana found her voice. "That's ridiculous!" she shrieked. "This is community property. You can't just claim to own a lake." But even as she said it, I could see doubt flickering across her face. Rachel stepped forward and laid out more documents. "These are the property records going back to the 1980s, she said in a calm, professional tone. "Nathan's grandfather purchased the entire watershed and left it to Nathan in his will." "You're lying!" Dana screamed, her voice cracking with desperation. "Show me proof." So I did. I spread out the original survey maps, the development plans, and finally the deed that confirmed my ownership of not just the lake but the land under 18 of the 23 houses in Sunset Harbor. The room erupted into chaos. Residents were pulling out their phones, came out immediately, some people recording, others demanding to see the documents themselves. A few were already heading for the exits. "What does this mean for our houses?" someone called out. "Are we all trespassers now?" asked another, their voice tight with anxiety. Dana was frantically shuffling through the papers, her face going through several shades of red as the truth became undeniable. "Even if this is true," she said, her voice cracking, "you can't just kick people out. There are laws, you have responsibilities." She was clearly grasping at straws, desperate to salvage some authority even as it all crumbled. "You hid this information, this is fraud," she accused. "You deceived the entire community." "Actually," I replied calmly, "I had no idea I owned the lake until this week. I inherited my grandfather's estate without realizing the full extent of it. But now that I do know, I think we need to set a few things straight." I looked around the room, meeting faces that ranged from shocked to amused to concerned. "First, nobody is getting kicked out. Most of you have legal lease agreements that I intend to honor. Second, I'm not interested in being a tyrant landlord." But I wasn't finished. I walked outside and returned with a large, professionally printed sign I'd had made that afternoon. It read, "Private property, Sunset Harbor Lake owner, Nathan Cole." I calmly installed it exactly where Dana had placed her homemade community water signs earlier. The symbolism was perfect, a real authority replacing fake authority. Then I turned back to Dana. "However, I do think we need some changes around here, starting with honest leadership." Dana's composure finally cracked completely. "This isn't fair," she wailed. "I've worked so hard to maintain standards, I've sacrificed everything for this community." Several residents actually laughed at that, given how she'd been terrorizing them for months. "Dana," I said, not unkindly, "you don't own anything here. You rent the smallest house in the development. You appointed yourself to a position that doesn't exist, and you've been bullying people based on authority you never had. That stops now." The truth of it hit her like a punch. She looked around the room, searching desperately for support but found only embarrassed faces and recording phones. "I'm giving everyone 48 hours to hold a real election for community leadership," I announced to the room. Everyone gets a vote this time, Ian, not just Dana's hand-picked supporters. I want someone reasonable in charge who actually represents the community's interests. I paused and looked at Dana one last time. And I want someone who understands the difference between serving a community and going on a power trip. Dana gathered her papers with shaking hands, her outfit suddenly looking even more ridiculous under the harsh community center lights. "This isn't over," she said in a voice that was almost a whisper, but everyone could tell that it was over. As she left, Tyler Patterson actually started a slow clap. A few others joined in, clapping until Dana was gone. After she left, the meeting continued for another hour. Residents asked practical questions about property rights and community governance. The mood was surprisingly positive. People were relieved to finally have some clarity and to be free from Dana's arbitrary rulemaking. As I packed up my documents, Evelyn approached with a warm smile. "Nathan," she said, "you handled it perfectly, firm but fair." She paused thoughtfully. "Though I have a feeling Dana isn't done. When someone's entire identity crumbles like that, they usually don't go quietly." She was right. Monday morning brought an unusual peace to Sunset Harbor. Dana's so-called security patrols were gone. Her homemade signs had disappeared. For the first time in months, residents could enjoy the lake without fear of being harassed. But I knew Dana well enough to suspect she wasn't finished yet. Sure enough, around 10 a.m., I saw her car pulling out of the driveway, heading straight toward town with a determined glint in her eyes. Dana had driven to a strip mall law office sandwiched between a nail salon and a tax service. The lawyer, Jerry Hoffman, listened patiently as Dana laid out her folder of homemade HOA documents and ranted about my supposed abuses. After 15 minutes of reviewing her papers, Jerry gave her the bad news. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "this gentleman's ownership of the lake appears legitimate. The documentation is solid, going back 40 years. Your homeowners association seems to be broken bar informal at best." Dana pressed him, insisting there had to be some legal loophole, some way to challenge me. But Jerry explained that being the president of a non-existent organization didn't override actual property law, and that challenging a legitimate 40-year-old property deed would cost more than she could possibly afford. The consultation cost her $200 for news she didn't want to hear. Meanwhile, the community was finally organizing itself properly. Evelyn Brooks stepped up to coordinate a real election, and residents were excited about fair representation. That evening, we held the first honest community meeting Sunset Harbor had seen in years. 22 of the 23 residents showed up, the only one missing, Dana, who was too humiliated to face her neighbors. The vote was swift and the election was swift and decisive. Dana was removed from her self-appointed position by a vote of 21-1. Evelyn was elected as interim community coordinator with unanimous support. Together, we established simple, reasonable guidelines for how the community would be governed. No more arbitrary fines, no more harassment, no more fake authority, just neighbors working together to keep Sunset Harbor a pleasant place to live. But Dana wasn't ready to accept defeat. On Tuesday afternoon, she showed up at my front door. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her usual polished appearance was gone, replaced by a disheveled, haunted look. Her eyes darted around nervously. "Nathan," she whispered, "we need to talk." I invited her in, curious to see what her final move would be. She tried several tactics in quick succession. First, she tried bargaining. "What if I help you manage the community? I know everyone's buzzing as to their habits, their problems. You need someone like me." When that didn't work, she started pleading. "I've put everything into this place, it's all I have left after my divorce. Please, don't make me start over again." Finally, she resorted to threats. "You can't just kick me out. I'll contact the media. I'll tell them you deceived the entire community. I'll sue for wrongful eviction." I listened to her go through the whole emotional cycle, then responded calmly, "Dana, you have 30 days to find new housing arrangements. I'm not evicting you out of spite. I'm ending the lease because you've been harassing residents and me for months." The finality of it hit her like a blow. She broke down crying, but even through her tears, I could see she still felt entitled. "This isn't fair," she sobbed. "I was just trying to maintain standards." "No," I said firmly, "you were trying to control people because it made you feel important." "That's not the same thing." That afternoon, She left looking more defeated than I'd ever seen her. True to my word, I didn't evict any other residents. Instead, I worked with Rachel to create fair, straightforward lease agreements that gave people security while maintaining reasonable community standards. I eliminated all of Dana's arbitrary rules and replaced them with sensible guidelines focused on real quality of life issues. No more harassment about flower beds, children's artwork, or normal neighborhood activities. The transformation was incredible. Within a month, Sunset Harbor had become the kind of community people wanted to be part of. Property values rose, and there was a waiting list of people hoping to move in. Residents were genuinely happy to be there. We started organizing monthly community barbecues by the lake and set up a simple neighborhood watch program. It was everything Sunset Harbor had always wanted to be. The final scene of Dana's chapter played out on a Thursday morning in late August. I was having my coffee on the dock when I heard the rumble of a moving truck. Dana stood at her house, directing the movers as they loaded her belongings into an old, beat-up U-Haul. A few neighbors had gathered to watch, whether out of sympathy or quiet satisfaction was hard to say. As the truck pulled away, Dana took one last look around the community she'd tried so hard to control. Our eyes met across the water, and for just a moment, I didn't see the petty tyrant who'd made life miserably. I saw a broken woman who had lost everything she thought mattered. She stood there for a long time, probably realizing that all her schemes and power plays had led to this inevitable end. Then she got in her car and drove away, leaving Sunset Harbor finally at peace. Several neighbors waved goodbye, not out of spite, but maybe out of relief and a sense of closure for the whole bizarre chapter of our lives. That evening, I sat on the dock watching another spectacular sunset over the lake. I thought about how far we'd come. 6 months ago, I'd been a simple graphic designer who just wanted to fish in peace. Now, I was the property owner of a community I'd accidentally become the protector of. The whole experience taught me an important lesson. There's a difference between real authority and fake power. Dana had spent months trying to create authority through intimidation and fake credentials, but real authority comes from actually having responsibility and using it wisely. She'd been so obsessed with controlling others that she'd forgotten the most basic rule of leadership: you have to serve the people you lead. In the end, her obsession with power had undone her. As the stars came out over Sunset Harbor Lake, I thought of my grandfather and the legacy he left me. He'd built something that could last, a place where families could find homes and happiness for generations. Dana had tried to tear that down, but in the end, the truth had won. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't fighting back harder, it's showing people exactly who they decided to mess with. And sometimes, when you inherit something bigger than you expected, the best thing you can do is use that power to make life better for everyone around you. That's exactly what I plan to do.